So, how does a financial empire just collapse? How can one person or one really bad idea bring the whole thing crashing down? Well, today we're going to dig through the wreckage of some of history's biggest financial disasters to figure that out. We're looking at three cautionary tales that show you just how fragile the world of finance can be. Mark Twain really hit the nail on the head with this one. History, especially in finance, is an amazing teacher. And yet, it feels like we're always taking the same class over and over again. So the real question is, why? That's what we're going to explore. All right, first up, we're zooming in on a micro failure. This isn't about a global meltdown. Nope, this is the shocking story of how one single person with way too much power and a real knack for lying brought a 200-year-old bank to its knees. Let's talk about Nick Leeson. Back in the early 90s, this guy was the golden boy at Barings Bank in Singapore. He was a star trader, a supposed genius, making his bosses in London an absolute fortune. To them, he was a miracle worker who could do no wrong. But, as you can probably guess, behind the scenes, something else was going on entirely. So what was Leeson's big play? It was a strategy called an options straddle. Now, to put it simply, he was making a gigantic bet that the Japanese stock market would just stay flat. As long as the market didn't have any big swings up or down, he would rake in millions. It was a high-stakes bet on things staying calm. And then, the unthinkable happened. A massive earthquake strikes Kobe, Japan. And that stable market Leeson was banking on, it went into an absolute freefall. His positions were bleeding cash. But instead of cutting his losses, he did the exact opposite. He doubled down. In this insane, desperate gamble, he started using the bank's own money, secretly, to make these massive bets, trying to single-handedly prop up the entire Japanese market. Of course, the market didn't care. It kept falling, and the losses just spiraled into oblivion, eventually becoming bigger than the entire value of the bank. So how on earth did he hide these gigantic, bank-breaking losses? With a lie that was so simple, it's almost brilliant. When the stock exchange in Japan asked about his huge risky positions, he just said, "Oh, don't worry, I have an opposite trade in Singapore that cancels this one out." And when Singapore asked, he told them the exact same thing, just in reverse. And because the two exchanges were huge rivals, they never ever talked to each other. Nobody ever checked. And this is the crucial part, you see. This wasn't just about one guy going rogue. It was a total, catastrophic breakdown of the rules. Leeson was making the trades, and he was in charge of settling them. That's like letting a student grade their own final exam. He had limits on how much he could risk, but nobody was actually checking. He just cooked the books and sent fake reports back to London, and they ate it up. In the end, the official report said it all. It wasn't the complex derivatives that blew up the bank. It was a complete and utter failure of management, a failure of basic controls. The people in charge had absolutely no idea what their star trader was really up to. Okay, so we've seen how one person can cause chaos. But what happens when the entire system goes off the rails? Let's zoom out now from a single point of failure to a complete systemic collapse. We are, of course, talking about the 2008 global financial crisis. The 2008 crisis was really a perfect storm, just a chain reaction of terrible decisions. It all started with the spark, banks giving out risky home loans to people who, let's be honest, probably couldn't afford them. Then they added fuel to the fire. They took thousands of these shaky mortgages, bundled them all together into these complex financial products, and sold them to investors all over the world. The accelerator? Rating agencies came along and stamped these toxic bundles with their highest possible rating, AAA, supposedly as safe as it gets. And then, the crash. The housing market finally sputtered, people started defaulting on their loans, and that whole house of cards came tumbling down. And here's the really perverse part of the whole thing. For the banks, making a loan wasn't about lending anymore. It was about fees. They could make a loan, collect a nice fee up front, and then immediately sell that loan and all the risk that came with it to someone else. All of a sudden, they had zero incentive to care if the person could ever pay the money back. That was somebody else's problem. It turned into this giant global game of passing the pillow. Banks made the risky loans and passed the pillow to investors. Those investors then sold them to other investors, passing the pillow again. And as long as the music kept playing and home prices kept going up, it seemed like a brilliant idea. But when the music finally stopped, whoever was left holding that pillow got absolutely torched.
And unlike the Barings story, you can't just point your finger at one person. The entire system was in on it. The banks were ignoring risk to chase profits. Investors were blindly trusting the rating agencies instead of doing their own homework. The rating agencies themselves were using flawed models. And yeah, even borrowers played a part, taking on huge loans with little or no money down, thinking housing prices would go up forever. Everyone was just chasing the boom.
So we've looked at a singular failure with a rogue trader and a massive systemic failure. But this third category is different. This isn't about accidents or bad bets or miscalculations. This is about deliberate, intentional, criminal fraud. Warren Buffett has this fantastic line. He says the biggest heists aren't committed with guns, they're committed with pens. And he's right. The most devastating financial disasters weren't mistakes. They were calculated lies, told by the people right at the very top. I mean, just look at this hall of shame. You've got Enron, the energy giant that basically created a fantasy world of fake profits, wiping out $78 billion when it all came crashing down. You've got Bernie Madoff, who ran the biggest Ponzi scheme in history, stealing $65 billion from thousands of people. And then there's WorldCom, where executives just flat out lied on their financial statements, making over $100 billion in assets just vanish. These were not bad bets. These were crimes. Period. So, after walking through the wreckage of a rogue trader, a systemic meltdown, and a gallery of outright fraudsters, we have to stop and ask the really big question. What are the lessons here? What are we supposed to take away from all this? You know, when you boil it all down, it seems to come back to three timeless lessons. From the Barings collapse, we learned that without basic checks and balances, one person really can sink the entire ship. From 2008, we see what happens when everyone in the system stops doing their job. The whole thing can break down. And from the great frauds, we learn that you can't just trust people. You need skepticism, you need independent oversight. The one single thread that ties all of these stories together is discipline. Whether it's the discipline of one trader or one bank or the entire market, the moment that discipline gets thrown out the window in the chase for easy money, disaster is never, ever far behind. That is the fundamental rule. Which, of course, brings us right back to where we started. The lessons are all here. They're written in the billions of dollars lost and the lives that were ruined. History has given us all the answers. The only question that's left is, the next time the test comes around, will we have actually learned a thing?